some more. Heartbeats racing, time to fight. Show them all our endless might. Fight to the top. Don't ever stop. Fight to the top. Give it all you got. Pain and glory on the floor. Warriors, we want some more. Heartbeats racing, time to fight. Show them all our endless might.
Who's that? That's Mom? That was you? That was you?
Oh, here we go again. Here it goes again for another episode. This is episode 24 now. 24
We're moving it up. We're moving quick.
of the Muay community's absolute favorite show.
Welcome to the show. We have a special guest today, Mr. Eric Haycraft. Thank you for joining us. Eric is a veteran of the game. He's been around for a while. As long as I've been around, I've known him to be around. So, and that's a long time already. So, Eric, tell us about, a little bit about your background, how you came about, Muay Thai and kickboxing and your experience with that.
Yeah, so actually, I feel like I've told this story a million times, so it's probably redundant for some people. But as a teenager, in high school, I was obsessed with basketball. Really, I should say middle school, and I tried out for the freshman team and discovered that middle school basketball and high school basketball are not the same thing. And a short, not that good a basketball player, the coach patted me on the back and told me that I needed to find a new sport. And, basketball wasn't going to be my sport. And I kind of just didn't really have an idea for another sport. And just completely by chance, the part-time job that I had at the time, the boss had told me he was going to start doing Kung Fu at a local fire station. And so I went with him just to check it out. And we signed up. We started doing Kung Fu. And I definitely enjoyed certain parts of it and other parts I didn't enjoy. I enjoyed like sparring. I didn't enjoy all of the forms, all of the traditional aspects of Kung Fu. When it got to the point where we would start to learn weapons, I felt like a total dork. I didn't want to do it. I would start to skip out on classes. I didn't want to do that. So I guess probably around 17 years old, I found out, I started collecting everything martial arts, all the Bruce Lee books, every video I could find. And I found an old VHS tape at a store of fights from Thailand. And completely honest, the first time I watched it, so this would have been 1988.
Wow. The golden era, the actual golden era.
Yeah, I didn't like it at all because it didn't look like the traditional martial arts.
Do you recall the fighters?
No. This was it was not even one of the major stadiums. It was.
Oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. Somebody it looks like they were trying to make a documentary. I still have the VHS tape. I bought it from I stole it and paid for it.
That would be interesting to kind of like watch that again and see like where those guys ended up, if they became anybody.
When I had it, I watched it and didn't put it out of my mind. I thought it looked terrible. I didn't understand what I was looking at. Something about it kept bringing me back, and then so I started scouring for more and more VHS tapes of fights. And there used to be when malls were still a big thing. There was a video store in malls called Sun Coast Video, and one of these video stores I found some kickboxing fights like Dennis Alexio and things like that. So once I realized that there was a whole sport of martial arts fighting, not just this kung fu doing. It was interesting. I wanted to figure that out, but there was nothing like that in Louisville, Kentucky. I did find just across the river in Indiana an American kickboxing school, so it was like all above the waist kicks, basically karate with boxing. So I went over there. I joined that. I trained for a year. I had 2 American kickboxing fights, and I was hooked. I was hooked on just fighting. That's what I wanted to do. And then it was really just the video thing, collecting these videos. That kind of one thing led to the next. I found, and everybody back then, we eventually came to know one another, but all the old time guys that were around then, me, Pope Joy, we were all getting videos from one guy, the same guy. And he was located in Texas, and his name was Steve Armstrong. And Steve would go to a Thai grocery store, and they had VHS copies of all the Thai TV. So he would scour these things to pull off all of the Channel 7 fights.
Channel 7, Channel 3.
Everything. All of them. And this is prime golden era. I mean,
yeah, no kidding.
I was lucky to fall in love with the sport and become a fan right in that era. When I originally reached out to Steve, I told him I wanted a video. He said he gave me a list of everything he had. This is still before, in the early 90s, no one's messing with the internet a lot yet.
There was barely any internet.
It was the early days of
maybe 96, I think. When did
it was like 94 to 95 was when it started.
Like when it came to consumer, right?
So,
like
that's right. It was in schools and things like that. There was something
right.
But he just would mail me a list of everything he had, and then I would call him and tell him I want to order this, and I was trying to order all the stuff I wanted to see. Peter Cunningham and Dennis Alexio and these American guys that I knew who they were. And he said, all right, I'll sell you all this, but listen, you got to let me give you one tape for free, and I want to show you some fights that I think you should see. And he started putting Muay Thai fights on there. And early on, it was the same thing. I was interested, but it wasn't the guys that I didn't know how to, I didn't have a palate for it yet.
Right.
And maybe about the third order, he says, listen, you're going to have to watch this. I'm going to give you another free tape. I want you to watch the first fight on there. And call me after you watch it. And so tapes come in the mail. I tear them open. I throw that tape in, sit down in front of the TV. And it's, at the time, we weren't sure who it was, but it was the third fight. It was the second fight with Ramon Deckers and Coban.
Oh,
it was in Lumpini. And this is the fight where Ramon knocks out Coban in the first round. And
that's a good one.
I was blown away. Like this little white guy, and he's just it was a much more boxing oriented style that it registered a little bit more with what I was used to seeing in America.
Right.
And from the American kickboxing with more punch style fighting. So I called him. I said, who is this guy? And he was like, I don't know who it is. Because R in Thai kind of sounds like an L. We thought his name was Lamont.
Lamont Decker.
Yeah, we thought it was Lamont. So we were like, who's Lamont? And then what white guy is named Lamont? That doesn't make any sense. So we everybody scoured, but we start to find out who it is. And this was probably 90, 91, maybe 92. We start scouring all these other tapes. I find other tapes from Europe that we could order.
Did you happen to run into any of the action sports tapes?
So that was a little bit later.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, I'll let you tell your story.
Yeah. Come back to that because I got a lot. I heard you on another podcast talking about that. I was like,
yeah,
good time. So we collected a whole bunch of Roman Decker stuff, and then kind of a lot of odd connections that just weird. You guys know who Bob Wall is from martial arts history fame? He was the bad guy in Enter the Dragon.
Okay, yes, I know who that is. Yes,
the old white, the white guy. Bob Wall retired from acting and got into real estate and managing fighters. And so he became Dennis Alexio's manager. And I had tracked down his contact information. And when we knew who Ramon was, I said, hey, do you know how I can get in touch with these guys? And he goes, I do know the manager. I'll connect you guys. And I was doing it all by fax. And I was attending university. I was attending the University of Louisville. We had a Kinko's on campus, and so I would go to Kinko's. It was $9.99 for an international fax. So I shut off the first.
A lot of money back then, man. That's a lot of money back then.
Shut off the first fax to who I thought was Roman Decker's manager. It was a guy named Clovis Dupretz, and he was based in France. Clovis faxes back and says, "Hey, I'm not in fact Ramon's manager. I'm Rob Kamen's manager, but I do know those guys very well. I'll forward your fax to them."
We're all in the same kind of vicinity.
Yeah. And so I get a notification from Kinko's that I have a fax waiting to pick up, and I go in and it's fax from Cor Himmers, and that was Ramon's stepfather and trainer. And Cor was like basically it was one line. It said, "We got this message from Clovis. What do you want? How can we help you?" And so I wrote him back and I said, "I got no fights. There's not anything like this where I live. And could I come to Holland and train?" And he said, "Sure. We've had Japanese guys come over. We haven't had any American guys come over yet. Come on over." So, and probably within a month, I'd booked a flight on Delta for my first trip to the Netherlands.
No way.
Yeah. And I was lucky. By that point in time, I did have one fight. I had a fight in Florida, an amateur fight under my belt. And, I was so naive because I was 20 years old by then. And I had this idea that I was so hungry that I would do all these things, including fly to Holland to do this stuff, that nothing could stop me from I'm going to be a world champion someday. And then I got to Holland and started training, and it was like real. These are the highest level guys in the world. Like Ramon at that point in time was top of the food chain. And
right.
I had no idea what went into it. The running, the training, but more importantly, it was the thing that hit me the most was, we would show up at the gym, and for the first 2 weeks, they let me try to keep up with the A-class guys, and I was just getting smashed. I was getting destroyed. My body couldn't hold up. So Cor came to me.
Thailand.
Cor came and he goes, "Hey, why don't we move you to the B-class group? You'll do a little better. You can still come in and work with these other guys."
Man, crushing.
Yeah, no, but he was so right, because I go back to this group and I suddenly didn't feel like I'm fucking everybody else's stuff up, So
yeah.
But every weekend we would go to fights, and if you've been around that region of the world, if you're in pretty much any city in the Netherlands, in 2 hours in any direction, you're in another country. And there were fights in Belgium, there were fights in Germany, there was fights every weekend, somewhat all over the Netherlands. The infrastructure of the gym in this A-class, you had Roman Deckers, his main training partner then was another world champion, Noel van den Heuvel. Michael Lufat was in that group. Luke Verheyen was in that group. All these big names that were fighting everywhere in the world. Then there was the next tier down that were European champions, and then there was the tier down of Dutch champions, and then a whole bunch of fighters with 30 or 40 fights that weren't champions. And on my flight back home, I'm thinking, I've got nobody. I don't have a good pad guy. I don't have a team of guys that are champions.
Right.
Not only that, there's no fights in the 90s. I had my first fight in 93. First kick, not the American kickboxing fights, but the first actual kickboxing style fight. And then I had a Muay Thai fight in 94 in Niagara Falls. And then I had a fight in 95. It was like one fight a year, and there was just
back then. That's how it was.
In the back of my mind, I was like, okay, these guys are fighting every weekend. There's no way, this infrastructure. I think I knew. It took me a long time to say it out loud, but it was like, oh, there's no chance to be a champion like that. It just, I can't do it here. It's just and at 19 or 20 starting out, it's already too late. It's already too late, you know. So I never said it out loud, but I think I knew that. So I think a lot of the early path and even most of my fight career was accumulating enough experience, connections, learning how to build a real program so that someday I could maybe make the champions that I didn't have. I could build the infrastructure that I wish I would have had at that time. And, yeah, that kind of gets me to where I'm at now.
Nice. And then when did you start your gym?
So, I opened my first gym in 1996.
Okay.
So in 97, I went to Thailand and trained at Fairtex. And there was nobody there. You know, Johnson and I was still fighting. So every day I would get up and do clinch work with Noom and sparring with Noom. And then in the afternoons I would do pads with the trainers there.
Right.
And it was great. You know, but I left all the luggage I took. I gave all my clothes to the kids. And
Give it to the guys. Yeah.
And I packed all the gear, Thai pads, boxing gloves. Snuck it all through custom. And that was the gear that I used to start the first gym that I opened up. And while if I compared that to what we do now, it was like I knew so little. But then I knew so much more than everybody here that I was trying to do. So it was, you know, relativity was a thing. But
it evolved.
First gym, yeah, in 97.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
Now, our topic of discussion is, you know, I came up with Aziz in New York, training. And then, you know, 2007-ish, I started making my way to Thailand. And I did it quite often. And so I came up that Dutch style training, you know, partner drills, you know, heavy back and forth exchanges. And going to Thailand was a shock. It was a shock. It was just like, okay, first of all, I got my ass kicked pretty severely because one of my students told me that I was the coach. And I explicitly said, don't tell them that I'm a coach. I just want to be a student. So they targeted me right away. They're like, "Oh,
you up real good."
They had a good time. It was Enoat Kesamrit's coach. I think his name was Red at the time. And Enoat's coach, he was the mean one. Always the mean one, right? That makes the best fighter. Enoat's was super, super kind and gentle and soft spoken. But his coach was not. His coach was very loud, very mean. And I remember him just dumping me over and over and over until I figured out how not to get dumped. And that's kind of how they taught, right? Through pad work. And I saw the value in that too, because it felt like I was fighting. And I was making the same mistake until I didn't make the mistake, right? I didn't even need to speak the language. The only thing he told me, he said, he just pointed at me and he was like, "You, chicha, chicha." And I was like, "Oh, shit." My student's name is Brandon, actually. And I was like, "Brandon, you son of a bitch." I was like, "I told you not to tell him." And he was like, "I couldn't. I had to tell him. Like, I had to bust your balls." And so, but I'm grateful he did that because, I mean, I got to train with the Thais right out of the gates, which was great. It doesn't happen, very often with the foreigners, right? Like, you kind of have to earn that. So I got to train with NOI. I got to train with all these like really big. And Samrit Gym was like the number one gym at the time, 2008 or 9. It was voted like gym of the year or something.
So they already kind of separated out. That they were starting to get some foreigners then. So they kind of they had their guys.
I think they got like Masato's like protege that was training there, and like a lot of the K1 champions were training there. And so K1 Max, that is. And so, they were getting foreigners and they weren't really letting the foreigners train with the Thai. So I had special privilege. I don't know why, but I learned there was a steep learning curve. But, what are your thoughts? Like, how do you train at your gym? What do you feel on like, the drilling style, like Dutch style versus the Thai style of drilling?
So I think for me, it made more sense because just to say Thai style is kind of a blanket statement because I mean,
It is.
really, if you're not
It
in
is.
if you're not in Thailand, there's no such thing as a Thai style gym because
Right.
no one's training 6 hours a day. No one has dedicated pad holders that just live at the gym.
Right.
That are just there to cycle through people. No one's going
I
to go
feel
to.
like I'm that guy.
The people that are paying you money are not going to come in and do skip knees for 40 minutes.
Right.
And that's your thing.
I don't even think they do that now in Thailand anymore. They used to. I think they kind of made it more palatable for the Westerner.
Yeah. So if you eliminate the idea that you're gonna have real Thai style training anywhere but Thailand, that means it's already modified to some degree to fit a Western format. And for us, it's from a technical standpoint, we talk about strategies and techniques and defenses and counters from both general styles. And it's tough to say Thai style or Dutch style because I've been to 30 different gyms in Holland that are all slightly different. They all have their own unique flavor. And it's exactly the same way in Thailand. There's different flavors of, there's an aesthetic that you understand to play the game on both of those. And if you live outside of Thailand, you're going to have to, honestly, if you're competing, you're going to have to play kickboxing and Muay Thai both if you want to stay active.
Right.
I mean, there's just not enough fights, especially as an amateur, to do anything. In fact, as a pro, I mean, if you look at most of the big opportunities for professionals in the U.S. have never been Muay Thai. They've been when one of the bigger kickboxing leagues comes to the States and opens up opportunities. Whether it be when A1 tried to ramp up over here, when Glory was here, Lion Fight was there, but that was a shit show, pretty much.
Right.
From the jump. And that was it. They were the only ones that were doing that. Everything else was lower level stuff. But as an amateur, you're pretty much going to have this flexible style where you can try to interchange those rule sets.
I feel like right now I disagree on the amateur side. I feel like an amateur can easily have a fight every month if they really wanted to. Realistically, it wouldn't be. But the fight opportunity for amateur and youth today, from what I've seen, at least in Arizona and on the West Coast, there's a show here in Arizona pretty much once to twice a month, just in Phoenix. So, and then we have the major tournaments, right? We have TBA, we have, IPF, you have, US Open. Between all of that, if you really wanted to have, within 3 to 4 years, if you want to just fight, dedicate yourself to fight, I feel like you can get up to 50 fights if you just fight all the time in about 4 to 5 years span.
Yeah.
If you're just fighting as an amateur.
If you want to interchange kickboxing and Muay Thai. So the problem is, if you look at all the tournaments, it's stacked heavy with novices. The novice divisions are 80 to 90% of all of the competitors. What we're doing every year with all these tournaments is we're doing an amazing job of recruiting new people and not as good a job of converting up the novices to B class and A class. There's not an equal level up.
What would you say a solution to that problem is?
It's tricky.
If you had it your way, if you had full control of all the sanctioning bodies in the States and they had to do what you say, what would be the solution that you would come up with that would allow for amateurs to develop easier?
Yeah. I think that the biggest problem we have, and some of that is from the MMA influence, it's hard to find a gym now that doesn't have some MMA athletes in it, or that's where they're making the most of their money. I mean, most kickboxing gyms, the highest paid athletes are MMA athletes in their gym. But in MMA, if you've got 10 amateur fights, you're probably already starting to look at what a pro career might look like. And because there's so many fights, you could make that jump and kind of build your way up through the pro ranks. We don't have that opportunity in kickboxing. So the idea that, if you could convince more people that they need to think of their amateur career in more along the terms of you're going to have 50, 60, 70, 100 fights, to get ready for something other than, amateur stuff. that's the problem. If you want to get, I had Adam Edgerton had 70 fights. We were queued up to go to the Pan Am Games with USA Muay Thai when the day they shut down all the airplanes. We were supposed to go to.
Oh shit!
We had everything. Flights were booked. Everything, and that was right at his peak. I mean, he was right at the right age. He had won that year. He won every major tournament we went to. He won all the tournaments.
I remember that actually. He was killing it back then.
He was. It was there, and then COVID comes, and there's essentially a 2-year gap of everything, and Glory folded up shop because he was in a developmental league for amateurs on undercards of Glory. He did 4 or 5 fights on Glory events. They left. COVID comes. Now the whole landscape changes. Friday night fights is gone. Like everything that we had outlets for was gone. And he's at this age where it's like, okay, I've put in all these years. Maybe it's a good transitional time. So he stopped. But trying to do today that, it's even trickier because you've got all these novices. So yeah, you could fight every month until you have 20 fights. And then how are you going to get matches? How many fighters are out there with 20 fights? How many are there with 30 fights out there? How many fighters in the US have 50 fights? So once you start getting into that thin air, it gets really hard to get fights.
Yeah, you'd probably have to travel.
Then you're traveling, you're spending money again, and then that's where it's important to be flexible in the rule sets. And what happens, a lot of guys, they jump ship and they just give up and go do MMA.
Right. There's more opportunity there.
Right?
Like Shevchenko, like all those IFMA ladies. What's the other girl? The light.
Urena.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there was just a bunch of like great Thai females that just went to MMA because where else are they gonna go, right? Like
they maxed out potential with Muay Thai. There was nowhere.
Even Jermaine was like a killer, killer in the 90s, 2000s. Like, Jermaine went, the Iron Lady. She's actually a Sitan gym. She started at Sitan, Morocco, and she was just an axe murderer, man. And a lot of girls were scared to fight her. In Muay Thai, forget about like MMA, like Muay Thai, they were freaked out with the boxing gloves. Imagine now you got these little MMA gloves. It makes sense. And she would be finishing girls left and right? Jermaine was killing it.
I think if you asked me if I had control to manipulate things.
Yes.
Here's what I would start with all the tournaments. I think one, you've got to make novice not somewhere 0 to 4 or 0 to 3. It's a little different with different tournaments, but you've got to make novice like 0 to 12, and you got to get out of this idea that 6 fights somehow isn't a novice. You've done something 6 times. You played your sport 6 times. You're still a beginner. If I only played golf 6 times, I still suck. The first 6 times I drove a car, I still sucked at driving a car. Add to that with the tournament format. Adam did a WK tournament in 2014 and fought 7 times in 2 days. So now he's got 7 more fights on his record, but it was only 1 training camp for all those fights. I mean,
right. You just jumped into B class in 1 day.
Yeah. I mean, it's not, then say those same 7 fights were spread out over a year. We had 7 training camps, 7 sets of running for all these 7.
That's an interesting variable, right? Like how many training camps did you do? Because then you had that growth period every single fight rather than 7 fights with no growth.
He had those 7 fights, but we didn't do 7 different fights. We were ready. We did our thing for 7 fights. You get rounds. It's still great experience, but you don't level up 7 fights worth of experience in a tournament like that.
Absolutely.
It's one event. You had a fight. It was just more rounds, if that makes sense. So, of his 70 fights, because we were reliant on the tournament format, it's not like he had 70 fights of, say, what a Dutch guy had with 70 fights.
Right.
So
very different experience.
I think we have to.
So expand and push the limits of novice. What else?
Widen that B class. and then ditch belts for anything but A class. I think that so many people enter these tournaments, they get a belt, they're fucking happy. It's
so my partners will attest to this. That was my idea when I started the U.S. Open. Am I correct, Brandon, Ryan?
Yeah, no, we all
We
all
were
try to
opposed.
do the
We were-
international format, which is medals,
We
even
didn't
medals
even wanna
only.
give out a belt. We were like, you know what? We'll give you a trophy for the winner if you're B and C, and A get a belt. And we had a nice that belt was a beast, and we only had it for A class. And man, did we got lashed by the people. Oh, how could you do this? How could you do this? The novice worked just as hard as the open class. And I was like, are you fighting for experience or for that belt? And they're, and it was clear they were fighting for the belt.
Yeah.
They wanted that belt hanging on that wall. And on a business standpoint, it's kind of tough. If you take away that belt, now all the other tournaments that have a belt become more competitive, right? They're like, well, what do I get if I win this tournament? This dinky medal? What if I go to IKF or TBA? I get this really nice belt.
Yeah.
And so that's okay. Like, okay, let's go on. No, so expand the divisions and then make the belts only for the open class. What else?
Listen, I'm also all for ditching amateur belts altogether, to be fair. I mean,
I agree.
yeah, there's belts everywhere for everything. It's the belt
Every
is just
fans just need so much support.
yeah, it's a new trophy. Someday it's going to be cool to not get a belt. Everybody else gets a belt, and the champion gets the trophy. Right? But
well, the thing is with the belts is that it's supposed to be difficult to attain, right?
Yeah.
That's the value, right? If everybody can just pick up a diamond off the street, I wouldn't give it to my wife. I wouldn't give that to my wife. I'm like, what the hell is this? You picked that up off the street. You could get it anywhere.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the belt. When we started the Science Fight Productions, and I don't know if you remember that, the youth championships that we did.
yes,
I made it so difficult to even qualify for a belt because I had my own gym. So I didn't want anybody accusing me of favoritism. And so even for my own guys, they were like, well, we want a title shot. We're like, well, do you qualify? Because I'll give you a title shot if you qualify. You have to have a winning record. You have to have 15 fights. You have to compete against someone that resides outside this continent for a world title. You have to compete, and it's got to be 5 rounds and full rules. All of a sudden, they were like second guessing that title fight.
right.
And you know what's interesting is our champions, most of them ended up on 1FC.
Yeah. those
Those kids, the world champions, all of our youth world champions, became like big names in the sport. And I think that's a testament to, like, these were true champions. Like, it was difficult to attain that belt. If you had it, it was coveted. And then you had to defend it or you lose it. You
Yeah.
lose that title right away. And I don't think that's the case anymore. The defendable belts, WBC is doing a good job about it. Although there could be some things that could be done better with WBC, but at least they're making an effort to make it difficult, in my opinion, to attain the belt and hold it. It's not an easy thing to hold. If you have a WBC belt right now, like, I see these belts, they're passed out, like, bro, like, how many times I've seen like 17 of the same belt all over the place. I'm like, whoa, anybody can get it. And interim belts, I'm like, what the hell is an interim belt? What does that even mean?
Yeah. So belts have become the ploy it's a marketing tool. That's all it is.
Of course.
And on smaller promotions, little regional promotions, it's a good way to get your fight. The two fighters that are going to fight for the belt are going to theoretically have more incentive to sell more tickets.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
Get
So
that.
there's that. There's the promoters have to make money, but also clearly for me, we have way more participants now. but I don't think we necessarily have way more. I mean, who's going to be the next Kevin Ross, right? Who's the next Joe Schilling? Where are they at? Those guys came out of.
Here's the real question. Here's the real question. Kevin Ross' skill set today. Is he going to be at the top?
Yeah.
Would he survive at ONE FC? Would he
yeah.
survive? Like Kevin Ross back then didn't have a big talent pool to go against. Don't get me wrong.
For sure.
I love Kevin Ross. I love Kevin.
Every generation, right? That's every generation. Every generation is they're gonna, you know,
it's gonna improve, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so, like, maybe it's becoming more difficult because the talent pool maybe is more talented. They're a lot harder to stay at the top. There's a lot more athletes coming up.
For an American, it's difficult because it's to just get enough experience, right? Like you can have the training, you can have the skills, you can have the strength, but it's really hard to circumvent the experience, right? You can't cut in line without the experience. And so
you won't make it.
If you look at the guys that have even scratched and clawed their way, you know, like Asa, take Asa for an example, right? Asa has a quite extensive fight background with amateur stuff, with kung fu, full contact Sanshao fights, and amateur boxing, and you know, it wasn't like he did the TBA tournament to get ready, you know, and got there. But I don't think that you could recreate. You can't easily recreate a guy with 60, 70 fights.
No,
in mass, you just can't do it.
There are exceptions to that rule, like Jake Peacock was on, and that's just he's just an insane athlete.
Yes.
Like I've never actually seen anybody go straight to pro. He really didn't have a lot of amateur fights. Went straight to pro technically, and is destroying people. And you would think he would have a hard time having one hand. It's like the most incredible thing I've ever seen. But there are exceptions to that rule, right? Like, how the hell did he do that?
Right.
You know? But he also comes from a kickboxing background, Kyokushin background. You know, he has a lot of fight experience in other martial arts, and that counts for a lot.
Exactly.
Right?
That's the whole point of all this. Like, it's just getting the competitive. Think about like how many Taekwondo matches did you have over your career?
Probably 200 to 300.
Right. I mean, Tiffany Benzos was doing karate fights.
It was 5 fights a weekend, 4 fights a weekend for years.
Yeah.
For years, you know. And we literally traveled the whole country trying to chase rounds and fights. And yeah, you're right. Like that counts for a lot, right? Like that ring experience it does kind of, you know, test your metal a little bit. You're able to kind of handle it when you get in there.
If you look at like in Holland, right? They've got it's kind of MMA is finally starting to, you know, money talks. So the more money you can make, that's where the fighter's going to go. It's slowly starting to chip into kickboxing a little bit, even in the Netherlands. But if you take a guy like, do you remember Robin van Roosmalen?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Robin has like 50 or 60 professional fights.
Right.
But he had 250 matches as a youth.
My
250
Lord.
matches as a youth. You know, like when all those guys were coming up, I've only been able to get still frame photos of it. I want to find the video, but as youth, as 16-year-olds, Gokhan Saki and Andy Sauer fought each other.
Wow. I would have paid a lot to watch that, man. Even as kids, I would want to watch that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the pressure cooker they've got to build for these other things.
And that's the caliber of fights that they're having as kids.
Yes.
That's kind of what we wanted to create with Siam. We actually had over 20 countries represented on that show in the 4-year span that we had it. And it was mostly youth. And there was some fights that I remember Brandon, you know, kind of grumbling at me because we weren't going to make a nickel off of them. And it was Portugal versus, what was it? Portugal versus Korea, right?
Let me actually a correction for the audience. We were never making any money whatsoever.
No, correct.
I was trying to keep us at
It was-
par.
and
So
I'm
let's
the
all
big
be
spender,
clear.
right? So I mean, that's kind of Brandon's role, is like to keep
Not
me.
mortgaging the gym furniture to keep the show on. That's
It's true, man. We were doing crazy. I mean, I'll be honest. That is probably one of our proud. I was personally myself. It was one of my proudest achievements as a promoter, is to be able to have moved the needle for a lot of these kids that are now, look at, Kiara Brandt going and to the Olympics. She was a novice on that show. She fought a lot. Her first international experience was on our show.
Yeah.
And locally, right? Like, you're fighting. So there was a Dutch girl from Holland with 100 fights at 16.
That's
Georgina.
Van der Linden. Yep. Mhm.
Yeah, she 99-1, I think she was, something like that. It was crazy number. I was
Yeah.
like, you got to be kidding me! This is crazy. She came out and she fought a monster Muay Thai girl with 7 fights, and it was a scrap. And imagine those kids now, like, having that experience, right? I wish there was more of that.
So I
Here.
think that there's a secondary problem that if you look at the rapid expansion just in, say, the last 12 years of Muay Thai across the USA. I mean, when I say Muay Thai, I'll kind of lump kickboxing in with the mix.
Sure.
There's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of new coaches, and I think there's a significant portion of those coaches that don't yet have the skill set to coach above and beyond a novice level. And so they kind of create this revolving door. They show up every year at the TBA with a brand new crop of newbies. They go home with some number of belts, which checks the box that they're good. We're doing it. We're competitive. Those people quit. They're not around anymore. They come back the next year with a new crop. They win a couple belts.
They're not developing any B class, A class pros.
On a whole, if you look at the numbers of all the tournaments, I mean, I'm sure you guys see it too. You're going to have.
Yeah, it's a
Knowledge.
big number.
Think every year, every 2 years, let's say 2 years, because that'll give you the time to accumulate the numbers to jump a class. If every 2 years, 50% of the novice move to B class, and if every 3 years, 50%,
Huge B class, massive.
but we've never managed to. We're not.
I would say 10% go to B.
Yeah, I want to add something to this. Add something to this too. Like, what I've noticed is that it seems that there's a lot of people that want to tick off this box, right? Like, especially, being an outsider, I can attest to how that feels coming into the gym. I've never fought, but I've trained with fighters. I've sparred with, I think even Sidichai once. You know what I mean? So, but not, for fun. Sparring in the gym at Sitsong Pinong. But you want to tick off that box, get that belt, say that you've done it, and then they kind of move on to something else, right? They're not really committed to making this their like long-term craft. So
There's a lot of those guys, right? That bucket list kind of deal. So I've always
that's my thought on it, that I see that a lot, and that's why the C class, maybe not so much. I do think people could do a better job of actually after that keeping that momentum, and saying to these guys, look, here's how well you did here. You came off some losses, let's do it again, and let's already get you registered. And I think that's the reason we try to always have the next event coming right behind the last one, so to keep that momentum moving forward.
Go ahead.
Because we have such a majority, like, relatively new coaching culture. A lot of those coaches are coaches because they won a novice tournament somewhere and they were ready. They have the belt. They're the champ. They have a gym now, and that's what they know. I mean, that's what they are doing.
That's the limits of what they know, right?
Yeah, and so it's a heavy step to the next jump for the whole sport is the hardest jump, and it's even harder when there's not. The sport can never take off without. You can't grow it grassroots up, and you can't grow it big leagues down. It's got to kind of come up from the bottom and down from the top together. So when Glory first came to the States, and when I went on board pretty much from the jump with Glory, and I told them, I said, we've got to build it in America. The fighters that you want don't exist, and it takes years to build them. It's not something we can just
Right, takes a long time.
We need 10 years to be fair. There's fighters out there that we can get, and they'll have some with good matchmaking. They can be competitive, but they're not going to be the best guys in the world. They're not going to beat the best guys in the world.
There's a fighter that's what is this? The Nightmare KB. I don't know if you know that guy, but he said that there needs to be a barrier to entry to coaching. He thinks that there needs to be some kind of like, I mean, that's an interesting idea, right? Like, at what point do you coach? Now, here's the other thing. I have seen great fighters as absolutely atrocious coaches. I have seen it.
As have I, of course.
I've seen it, and I've seen guys that, you know, like you said, that have maybe 1 or 2 belts, and they produce like killers. Like, what the fuck? Like maybe 5 or 6 fights, and they're producing winner after winner, pros, amateur. So there's a spectrum, I guess, right?
There is. What used to that filter used to be competition, right?
Right.
So you didn't used to validate your success on winning tournament belts in any division, right? Like if you look at the first several generations of guys, it was, you know, who's going to end up fighting internationally, and someone else is paying the plane fare. You know, like who's getting paid to fly somewhere, not that you're buying your own tickets to go somewhere. And it was a way smaller sport then. Obviously, we've changed things a lot, but as it's grown, we've kind of grown it into a pay to play kind of a, you know, we've made it into this massive group of bucket listers. It's, you know, out of that, we're going to spring up talent, no doubt. I think that some of those coaches that are inexperienced now, if they don't quit and they're, you know, they're driven, who's to say in 5-10 years
they become great coaches.
Be great coaches. And
if they continue to learn, they go out to Thailand, they continue to train, and you know, you keep your mind open. You know, Nightmare KB says, same way you need credentials to be a barber, a cosmetologist, there needs to be some sort of barrier to entry.
Well, Master Toddy's got the barrier to entry. I mean, don't all laugh. Sorry, Master Toddy, that was not meant as a slander. I'm just
now he does have a point, because in Taekwondo, and I'm gonna be next week we're gonna be on the show with Julio Triana, and he wants to talk about, you know, ranking, like belts in Muay Thai.
Yeah, and I'm a con.
Yeah, pretty good.
I'm a certified Crew X ×7 37th con.
You're a General 7th con.
The General Secretary of the Army of the Muay Thai in the United Nations.
Dude, so I mean, here's the thing. In Taekwondo, or at least Olympic styles, Kuki One, there's a headquarters, right? Kuki One is the headquarters in Korea. And there are strict rules on how you attain a black belt. You can only receive a black belt from a specific level of black belt. You can only, you know, be a certain age. You can't be like a 5-year-old second-degree black belt. Like, it's not going to fucking happen.
Yeah.
And so you have to be a certain age. It does have somewhat of a point there, right? Like, you know, even in boxing, USA Boxing, when you apply for your license, they ask you, how many fights do you have? What experience gives you, what is your experience that gives you enough knowledge to coach and corner? And it's a valid point. But it also, there's a lot of gray area.
Those things, you know what I mean? Who gets to pick and say
you're a qualified
coach and who's not a qualified coach? So, yeah, I mean,
it's a tough one. It's a tough one.
It's sports. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what was supposed to determine the good coaches, the outcome of activities.
Right.
You have to have the golden Mongol as far as from the Association Institute of Martial Arts. Is
I'm very curious to hear, because I come from that traditional background with the belts, and I felt like that system kind of worked. I created a system like that for the kids at my gym because I felt like, well, first off, every 3 months we sit down and we go, all right, we have a lot of kids, so it's kind of hard to keep track of what they know and what they don't. So we test them.
Yep.
I don't gouge them. My tests are pretty cheap. I make it pretty cheap, and pay for the shirt or whatnot. And we kind of have to see, okay, where are you at? Where deficiency do you have? We fail kids on a regular. It's a couple kids failed last test, and I was like, yeah, your jab, you're not keeping your backhand up. You're not stepping. You're not turning your hip over for your hook, or blah 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 blah. Right? And so, I feel like that kind of, and I think IFMA was trying to start something like that, a con system. And I don't know if Patrick and the WBC is trying to start something like that, but I feel like there should be a system at which you can attain a certain level, and it takes a certain amount of years of training. And there's some fundamental things that you should understand, right? Like, I know a lot of gyms. I've been to a lot of TBAs, a lot of tournaments, and a lot of gyms don't have a stinking clue on how to clinch.
Yeah.
And this is Muay Thai. And if you go to any amateur fight, people say, clinch is like a small part of it. I think it's like 50% of the fight. 50% of the time, the novice guys end up in that clinch position.
For sure.
And then I see them starting to punch the body and guard like this and do kind of weird stuff. I'm like, oh man, like who taught him that?
Yeah.
I want to tease something. I want to tease something for you guys for next week on our episode here. But this is just the image of exactly what we're talking about. That's been developed a long time ago. They've tested it throughout Thailand, and we're going to talk more about it. But this is the Mongkol system for the teachers. So the Khan is for the athletes, fighting, and the Mongkol level, this is the teacher. So your first one is assistant crew. You get up to assistant master, then to a Jarn, and go all the way through your.
It's an interesting like concept, right? Like you want to because you have to standardize at some level. And then if you want to compete in the Olympics in Taekwondo, you have to be a certain level of black belt, right? But the true test is in the ring.
Yes.
You can say whatever the hell you want, level, whatever belt.
I mean,
if you're whooping that ass in the ring.
If that was available and I had the funds to go to Thailand and collect all the Mongkons, then. But if I then came back to my gym and I had a Muay Thai gym that didn't compete at all, we never competed, and I have 700 students and they're all happy, but we never compete. But I'm this most certified master there is. Now I'm the master of a sport that we don't even play the sport. I mean,
you don't play it. That's right.
Without the competition side of it, the rest of it doesn't matter. It's
A lot of this was alongside the international agenda, so that's where I'm speaking from, is just knowing what their agenda was that was being pushed. And they started doing a programming. I think Tiago and we looked at some of it for a time, and looking at in practice, one of it was like just punches, right? Like the whole thing was just punches until you got the white Mongkon or no, it was Y crew.
It was
first
the Y
you
crew.
learn the Y crew.
You learn the Y crew first.
Then you get the white Mongkon. So you can't even practice Muay Thai at all until you learn the Y crew. And there was some interesting things behind it that we talked about, and we'll probably get more into that next week.
We're definitely, Eric, we're gonna wrap up here. Do you have any final thoughts you want to tell our audience? And
how about final thoughts on what's more effective? Dutch style.
All right, so
Thai style
answer
training.
that. What sport do you want to play? I mean, what sports do you play? Or who is the coach? Or what? Dutch.
There's a lot of variables.
Dutch style for me, and as not somebody who's done this for 20 years, I mean, I'm getting on like over a decade now or whatever, but I've always heard that as heavier handed, heavier with the punches, that brings in more of that Dutch component to
Generally,
Thai
yeah.
boxing.
So styles make fights. If you remember in K1, there was a fighter named Remy Bonyaski.
Bonjaski.
Yes. Remy sucked at boxing. He was a big kicker and kneer. They called him the Flying Gentleman because he liked to throw.
He would knee all the time.
And so he came from a gym, Majiro Gym, Bo's Gym. Those two gyms are the same family of gyms. He trained at both. That was his style. His Dutch kickboxing style was knees and kicks. So I think it's the idea of what I see when people say traditional Thai style gym. When I travel around the country, their students will all put on a belly pad and get out Thai pads, and they take turns running through feeding drills back and forth with the pads. We do a very similar thing without Thai pads on. They're just running shin guard drills. It's not that much different. It's just the packaging of it all.
What's interesting is I do, I used to just do the Dutch style for a long time. I've had my gym for 20 years. And for about maybe 6-7 of those years, it was just partner drills, Dutch style. That's all I knew. Till I went to Thailand.
Yep.
And then I went to Thailand. I was like, wow, this is a really great way of learning it. And I learned a lot in that style, right? And so, then I came back and I'm like, I want to do this style. And it was kind of hard because now I have to hold for, 40 people every day. And it kicked my fucking ass every day. Luckily, I was, 25, 26, and I had the energy until I didn't, right? And so today, I see value in both.
Yeah, of course.
I actually do both. Right now, as we speak right now, we call it bags and pads. I don't call it Thai style. I just call it bags and pads. It's basically you hit the bag until my staff, I have about 4 to 6 Thai pad holders for 3 hours. And you come in and you hit pads, right? Thai style. Pad work and then do your strength conditioning. We have a workout of the day in the corner. We put out all the weights. You do the workout of the day, pull-ups, whatever it is. And then you go home at your leisure, kind of like how I did in Thailand. It's like a mock. And then, 3 to 4 times out of the week, we do Dutch style drills where it's Muay Thai, but to the mitts or to the head, you're covering up or you're parrying or it's a lot of back and forth exchanges. And I feel like the Dutch style develops your defense better, in my opinion, than the Thai style. Your defense becomes a little bit better. And but the Thai style develops your power, your accuracy, your timing, because you're dictated when, and then you spar, right? Like I feel like the gyms need to do both, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
Oh yeah, I think we have a very similar format here. I don't have 5 guys that can hold pads. I'll do the pad work, and most of the pad work we reserve for the competitors. So, but it's very similar idea. Very similar.
Right. Cool. Any final thoughts, Eric?
Action Sports Magazine. Let's talk about that.
Action Sports Magazine.
So in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a gentleman named Mohammed Aitasu, and I'm probably butchering his name. But Mohammed he was the owner of
Mohammed started Sitan Gym Morocco. He's the founder.
He was a referee in lots of big Dutch events, and eventually decided he wanted to make his own promotion. And in doing so, he also created the WPKL, his own.
WPKL, that's right.
And they made big fight cards. They had the Champions League that was like, they put 2 times. Sakmon Kon and Jamhor on opposite ends of the spectrum. Dutch guys
Johnson got knocked out on that show.
He got knocked out by Hassan Kasriui.
Kasriui was spinning roundhouse kick.
Yep. And Action Sports was a magazine. He tried to corner the whole market. They had the magazine.
He did a good job, in my opinion.
Yeah, it was a great promotion. I
think he really spearheaded. He was responsible for spearheading a little bit of that golden era. There's obvious other promoters, but closer to the Southern Europe and Africa, he was bringing some humongous names.
And taking them, they were fighting on the King's birthday cards. All of those,
Right.
Yeah, all those guys were fighting on big shows down there.
Mel, Gilfoy.
I'll let you go to bed. Well, it's later here for me, so I'll go to bed.
But yeah,
Muhammad.
we will have to do, Eric. We're gonna have to do another show just
Absolutely.
to talk shop, man. Because you know, my coach used to give me these VHSs where I got to
I still
see,
got them all.
and I would watch them, and I never, back then, like you said, there was no internet, so that was my first experience watching like these legends, right? And I was like, holy shit, these fights are insane. They were real, Hippolyte. I don't never know how to say his name. Hippolyte, yeah. There was, oh man, I go on and on, but
Ryan
we will
Simpson.
save it for another show for sure, Eric. And talk shop, because that is a whole nother show's worth of conversation for sure. I want to say thank you, Eric, for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you. And join us next week. We're gonna have Julio Triana. We're gonna talk about like Muay Thai ranking. He has some ideas about, whether it should be done, whether it shouldn't. What are the pros and cons? We're gonna kind of debate it a little bit. Eric, you're always welcome to be on the panel if you like to jump on. So it'll be a fun conversation. Thank you guys for joining us, and we'll catch you next week at 7 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We're gonna have a new time, kind of modifying our time because Julio has a class to teach, and he's coming out of California, so it'll be a little earlier for him. So, but we really want to have him on the show. So join us at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time next week, Tuesday. Thank you again, guys. I'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.